It's 1:38 a.m. Time for Octoberpod. Good morning. We're here today with Mr. Thomas Miller.
You can just say Tom Miller
or
Thomas Miller. It really doesn't matter. I normally just go by Tom Miller.
Thomas Miller. He is best known as the host of the always irreverent You Had Me At Bigfoot podcast. But in addition to being the Crown Prince shock jock of the paranormal, he is also a real-life exorcist and was gracious enough to join us today.
Glad it's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a bit more about how you came to be an exorcist and talk us through the training process.
There's no real linear process of becoming an exorcist as far as training goes. What you have is, normally you'll have the Catholic Church, and they have a very specific set of, a very specific training program in which, you become a priest after, it takes like 7 years to become a priest because you go for your bachelor's but then if you want to become an exorcist, you end up having to go to the Vatican, and they actually have a program that you go and attend to become an exorcist. And they've increased that over the years recently, and each diocese, which covers a certain amount of the population in a given area, each one has its own exorcist. But for a Protestant like myself, I'm not Catholic. There's really no linear process in which someone would take to become an exorcist. And for me, I'll explain how it came to be for me. I for 10 years was into the paranormal, doing ghost hunts and paranormal investigations, and then I got out of it after my first son was born. I actually, my dad was a minister, and he would always get on to me and say that whenever I'm doing these ghost hunts and everything, what I'm really dealing with is not dead people. I'm actually dealing with demons, and I didn't believe him. After my son was born, right around the same time as Paranormal Activity, that movie came out, I watched it and realized, well, maybe he's on to something. So I kind of got out of it for the sake of my kid and all that. Eventually, I'd just gotten out of the paranormal entirely, and I was getting back into my faith, where I was studying the Bible every night. I was back in church. I was, very involved in my spiritual development, and I felt a legitimate calling to the ministry, and I had never wanted to get into the ministry. And I feel like I had made that very clear throughout my entire life, and I kept having this feeling like I was supposed to get into the ministry. And I remember at one point I told God, no, like this is not for me. You got the wrong guy. I can't, I would do more harm than good in the ministry. You got to find somebody else, stupid like human stuff. It was over a period of time, I kept getting like redirected to passages in the Bible talking about demonic influence, and this was all through like devotionals. It wasn't like I was actively searching for demon-related stuff. I kept getting turned to certain passages that were related to demonic influence and exorcising, specifically the Great Commission, and talking about exorcising demons. I had kind of like this revelation, like, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be. Like, I forgot that the ministry isn't just pulpit preaching, right? We had an episode on our show where we had Dave Outlandish come on, and he talked about how he fell away from his church and his faith because he wanted to know more about demons because they were scary, right? And he felt like it was something that he should know about, and he was just kind of turned away by the elders in his church. And now he's a full-blown demon summoning wizard, right? And I thought, man, somebody should have stopped that. There should have been somebody there who stopped him and who was able to help him. And then that was kind of like part of my revelation, where I was like, oh, maybe that's where I'm supposed to be, right? And so I realized that was kind of my calling, and it's always very difficult to explain a calling into the ministry to somebody who hasn't experienced it themselves. But I've had that aha moment, and I realized that that's where God wanted me. So I ended up having to enroll in seminary. So I'm actually a little more than halfway done with my seminary, it's a Master of Divinity degree, and it's 3 years long. Beyond reading and just studying demonology and kind of like tips and tricks to performing exorcisms, kind of studying where the Catholic Church gets it wrong, where some other religions get it wrong, where some get it right, and kind of like molding your own. Exorcism is not really like a linear process of learning. It's more about spiritual development and then kind of creating your own version of an exorcism, because no two exorcisms are the same. And it's more of an art than a science.
Have you had any personal experiences with demonic forces?
I would say what you see in movies and film and reading books and everything about exorcisms, it's friggin' terrifying, and it's disgusting, and it's vile. Like, everything about exorcisms is terrible, right? When you see it in media and read about it. And so there's really nothing about it that was appealing to me. I mean, and then this is all based off of like my experience, like you asked about personal experiences with the demonic. I've had a number of weird things that have happened during ghost hunts that I attribute to the demonic, but there's one that just really stands out, and I think is the one that it's the one that affected me the greatest. At this point I had quit ghost hunting, and it was 2010 or 11 or 12, somewhere around there. And a few of my buddies from when I was a recruiter, an Army recruiter, they had found out that I had been a ghost hunter at one point, and I guess they'd been watching all the Travel Channel shows or whatever. And they said, well, we want to kind of get into it. And I said, all right, go for it, go nuts, but be careful. And they said, well, no, we need somebody to kind of show us the ropes. And I said, oh, I got out of it I'm retired. I'm a retired ghost hunter. I'm at the old folks home for wayward retired ghost hunters or whatever. And I said, well, you know what? Better me go and show you how to do it right and safely than for you guys to go in half-cocked and like get yourself into trouble. So I went with them, and it was to a graveyard in Appleton, Wisconsin, which, in my opinion, going to a graveyard to ghost hunt is stupid, because ghosts don't hang out in graveyards. The thing that I always tell people is, if you want to find a ghost, don't go to a graveyard, because a graveyard is kind of like the memento mori, right? And it's associated with death, and people go there looking for that sort of thing. So what better place for a demon to go to and wait for the kind of person who wants to interact with the spiritual dimension, right? So I doubt that it's ghosts that you're dealing with when you go to a graveyard. I've never experienced a ghost at a graveyard, but the sort of things that I've experienced there are demonic in nature, and it just kind of solidifies my theory. But it was a cemetery, and the reason we went there was not just for like any random ghost, just to kind of like test the waters. This one in particular had a cemetery, like it has the main cemetery, then it has an offshoot that goes down a hill and then into the woods a bit, and there's a giant, like a big gravestone for this family, and then there's multiple tombstones in front of it for each individual person. And the whole purpose of it was, way back when, there was a woman who was supposedly a witch, and the good, pure people, prudish people of Appleton, Wisconsin, the good conservative Christians of Appleton, Wisconsin, we'll go with that, did not want to bury a witch with the rest of the people who were buried there in that cemetery. So they created their own little offshoot cemetery for this witch. And the family then was buried next to their daughter, their sister, or whatever she was to them. So they have this little family graveyard for this witch and her family. And we went down there, and there were 4 of us, right? It was me, and, well, I won't say their names, but because I don't have the permission to say their names. But there were 4 of us, me and 3 other dudes, and we go down this hill, and we're standing in front of this giant tombstone, and then the little one's in front of it. And we're having such like positive interaction, right? We're having like very intelligent interaction where we're hearing, the whispering in the trees, and we're hearing like, hey, knock twice if you're there. And then there'd be like 2 knocks. And we're like, all right, it's a fluke. Knock 3 times, and it'd do 3 knocks. I mean, it's very intelligent haunting, like bang 2 sticks together and you'd hear 2 sticks together. And so at this point, we were like confident that we were being messed with. There was somebody up on the hill. So 2 of the dudes go up the hill and they go to like kind of investigate and see if there's anything there. And we can see to the right of us all the way to this cliff. So there's like no way that anybody could be to the right of us or in front of us, because again, it's like on the other side of this tombstone. It's kind of like a drop off, this steep drop off. And so they go up the hill, and me and this dude are standing here, and we're doing the EVP session and goofing, messing with the EMF and all that, and continuing the conversation with trying to get this thing to interact with us. And as we're standing there, I remember I'm going to relive it for you so that I can describe it vividly, right? I'm looking towards the tombstones, and this dude is to the left of me, and I've got like the EVP, the recorder in front of me, and off to my right, like from behind me, moving forward into my vision to my right, I see this mass of something kind of like floating. And I mean, at where it's at is probably like 7-8 feet tall, but it was like off the ground a little bit. And it just slowly floats by in like a very smooth, it wasn't like a walking or jerky motion, which probably would have been way more terrifying, but it just kind of drifted into my peripheral. And then just before it got to my like 2 o'clock, it veers off to the right and goes out of sight. So I couldn't make anything out. I didn't look, and I don't know why I didn't look. I think it had something to do with, quite possibly it could have been some kind of interaction that it had with me where it forced me not to look. Could have been that I was just frozen in fear, which wasn't ever the case. And that's kind of what bothered me about it, just because I had never been scared to look. If I saw something, heard something, whatever, I would always look. And this thing, I couldn't look at it. And it was in, if I could describe it, it was in the shape of a person, which is very cliche, but it was, off the ground a little bit, very just solid black and matte in color, and then it drifts off. And I stand there for a few seconds, kind of just taking it in, thinking about it. And I finally look over to the dude that I'm standing there with, and I said, did you just, and he interrupts me, like he cuts me off, and he's like, see something off to the right of us? Yeah. And so, like, we knew at that point that we had seen something, right? And I even asked him, I'm like, did you look at it? What did it look like? And he goes, I couldn't look. I didn't have it in me. I couldn't look at the thing. And again, I think it had more to do with, like, it not allowing us to look. You know what I mean? So this happens. Eventually, we wander up the hill, and we meet up with the 2 other dudes. And we kind of explained to the guys that there was something. We didn't tell each other what we thought it was, and we were like, well, let's just tell the other guys, and then they can kind of like tell us if we had the same experience, if we saw the same thing. So I describe it to the one dude, he describes it to the other dude, and then they go and they talk, and they're like, yeah, you guys saw the same thing. So after that, like, again, I didn't do any ghost hunting. Like, I walked away from it for a long time, and shortly thereafter, I started having issues. Now, with like PTSD type issues, right? Major depression, anxiety, and all these other like minor things, right?
Was an exorcism ever performed on you?
I'm still in the Army at this point, and I started going to counseling. And I had gone on 2 deployments prior to this event, and so when I started talking to them, they were like, well, it could very well be PTSD. And I assumed that they were correct. And I started taking the medication. I started going to the counseling, all that. And things were just getting worse. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it was to the point I was hearing like the talking, like the whispering in my ears, right? And the final straw for me was I was sleeping I was working like night shifts or whatever, and I was sleeping during the day, and I heard like I woke up to somebody screaming, kill yourself. And it jolted me awake, of course, because there's a screaming, right? and then I'm thinking about what it said, and like it really stressed me out. I didn't tell anybody except for my counselor. And then we weren't making any progress when I was talking to my counselor. So he actually brought up my case to a friend of his in the field, who's also another in the field of mental health. And this dude, he said, you said something about this dude used to ghost hunt, right? And he said, has he ever like indicated that maybe he's got like a demonic possession? And this is not the sort of stuff that like a psychologist or whatever brings up. But my counselor, one day, he said, so I talked to a buddy of mine and about your case, and I got to ask you, have you ever dabbled in the occult? And I'm thinking he's talking about like summoning the devil and, playing with the Ouija boards and stuff. And I said, no. And he said, didn't you used to ghost hunt? You told me about you used to ghost hunt. I'm like, oh, yeah, man, I used to do that. So he goes, well, I talked to my guy, and he thinks that maybe you're demonically possessed or oppressed. And I was like, no, don't. I was like, I'm still in control of myself. I'm not possessed. And at this point, I had such limited knowledge of it. This is years ago. And I said, I'm not possessed. I'd know if I was possessed. And he said, don't tell anybody, like, don't tell the board that I'm like talking to you about this, because I will lose my license. And so he has this like literature that he's printed out from online. I mean, he's done his due diligence, right? He goes and he like researches the whole thing and finds out how to exorcise a demon from for an oppression. Tell you what, this is the wildest part. Like, I would have thought, there's nothing to this story, right? But as he's like, so do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, let's do this. And as soon as he's like, all right, get ready, let's do this. As soon as he said that, that was like the place that I wanted to be, the very least in the entire world at that moment. Like, nothing would have made me happier than to just leave. I felt sick. I felt pains. I felt extreme discomfort. I felt panic. I felt like every bad emotion and bad physical reaction that you could feel at that moment. And it was because I think, and that's kind of what gave it away to me. I'm like, well, maybe there's something to this, because like right now I do not want to do this. And that's when I realized, like, well, maybe there is something else kind of at the wheel right now. And so we went through this whole process, and it was a very simple thing. I mean, it was just, I believe he read something and I had to repeat after him. And then we said a prayer, and then I forget what all else went into it. But at the end of it, I probably could have just been very dismissive of it and been like, that was nothing. But as soon as it ended, like the color returned to my vision, right? Not that I was like seeing in black and white, but it was like when you turn down the color setting on those old-timey TV. I know you know what I'm talking about, Edward. Those old-timey TVs where you could like turn down the TV or the color on the little knobs. It's like it was turned down just enough to be noticeable when you turned it all the way back up again. And that's exactly what it looked like. Like all of a sudden, like the color just returned to my life. And I felt like this wave of relief wash over me. And he said, as soon as we were done, he's like, just color kind of like returned to your cheeks, and your eyes, they didn't have this glossed over look anymore. He made me promise I would never get into the occult again, right? He said, you got to remember this passage that says if they clean the unclean spirits out of you, and the unclean spirit will come back and check it out and see if like it's safe to come back yet. And if it sees that the coast is clear, it itself will come back, as well as like 7 other nastier demons, right? So I was like, yeah, no, that's the last thing I want, is like 7 nastier demons. And so I promised I would never get back into the occult. Now I'm demonically oppressed again, because I had to get into it all, and so I have to deal with all that again. But the way I see it is, I would rather have these demons attached to me than just somebody who doesn't know what is going on with them. Like, I don't want somebody to feel the way that I felt when I didn't know what was wrong with me. So if I can keep them preoccupied, like, I'm okay with that. Like, I would rather them come and hang out with me. And I'm keeping demons off the street. If I was running for president in 2020, that would be my campaign promise. Tom Miller, keeping demons off the street, draining the demonic swamp.
What advice would you offer to help people avoid a demonic attack?
So this is where I'm going to have to processize a bit. And there's going to be people who disagree with me, and that's fine. I deal kind of exclusively with Protestant people Christian people, which typically is Protestant people because they can't get help from the Catholic Church. And then people who are Catholics who can't get help from the Catholic Church either because they are either, they haven't been there recent enough or whatever. As I understand it, there are, rabbis who perform exorcisms using Judeo or Jewish means and methods and rites and rituals, and same thing with Hindus and imams from Islam. They each have their own particular set of skills. And so what I would say, and I guess even from any of them, whatever religion you practice, just be in good standing in your religion, right? That's what the Catholics would call being within the grace of God. The idea is to just be good based on the teachings of your particular religion. Now, as it stands for Christianity, just do right by the Bible, and you tend to not experience these sort of demonic attacks, because if your spiritual development is in a good place, then you're generally like not off limits, but you're kind of like unofficially off limits. Like, they just don't bother with you. The only time that it happens, and people ask about this all the time, is like, can a born again Christian be possessed? And the answer is yes, absolutely, because Christians, we're not perfect. We're sometimes like the worst type of people out there. And don't get me wrong, like, a lot of people think, oh man, like, exorcism, that's so cool, and like, I'm sure a lot of people appreciate what you do, and like, it must be very hard, and people have this impression of what the Exorcist does. And unfortunately, it's been what's the word I'm looking for? It's been compounded by like the pop culture of, oh man, exorcists are so cool, and their job is so dangerous and scary and whatever. But like, and yeah, it sucks, and like, yeah, it can be dangerous, but like, at the same time, we don't really do anything. All the heavy lifting is done by God through Christ, and that's literally like where all the power and everything comes from. I often tell people, like, I'm just here to serve as like the middleman who gets scratched, spit on, puked on, sworn at, shoved, hit, tossed across the room, whatever needs to happen for this event. Like, I'm that guy, but I'm an extension of God's hand into the physical realm. Then they'll ultimately ask how much I charge, and I'm like, dude, I don't charge anything. I'd be leery of anybody who does charge you for this sort of service, because they're probably like modern day spiritual snake oil salesmen, man. If you're having like legitimate experiences, I would definitely reach out to a paranormal team in conjunction with an exorcist. That's a lot of where my work comes from, is paranormal group referrals. I try not to go to I try not to go to somebody's house unless a paranormal investigator group is there. I am not going to that person's house alone. Like, I have to have somebody there. And usually beyond somebody that I know, because right now I have a medic who works in an emergency room, and he comes with me to these exorcisms. And beyond him, in situations like that, I just won't go to the dude. I'm like, no, we got to wait until a paranormal investigator group shows up. But here's a freebie for you. Currently, I'm actually working on a case with a gentleman in this one I can tell you because it doesn't have any like personal information attached to it. There was this gentleman who reached out, and he was doing a live stream of this doll that he got. Now, dolls, I think, are the perfect conduit. They're the perfect thing for a demon to cling to, right? and I'll tell you why. What it looks like a person, first of all, and that's the ultimate goal of a demon, is to inhabit a person. And at the same time, what gets carried around more than a doll? Now, you have little girls who carry around dolls, and they just love having them around. They'll sit in the living room with you. Anybody who has daughters or whatever, you know how it is. The doll is a part of your life just as much as the child is when they're going through that stage where they're carrying it everywhere. So if a demon attaches itself to this doll, it's always going to be around. It's always going to be like near somebody. It's going to be carried to all these different events and kind of be able to scope the situation out a little bit better. So I think when you have a doll that's supposedly haunted, what you're really dealing with is an attachment by a demon, and you need to be very careful with that. So this dude was doing a live stream of this doll, and he collects them. He's a paranormal investigator. He collects haunted dolls. And he said that the previous owner claimed that it had demonic activity, or a demonic activity that would happen in the presence of this doll. And they thought that it had a demonic attachment. And this dude was like adamant that it was a ghost and not a demon. And of course, naturally, I'm always a little leery about that, as I just previously stated. But he's asking it all these questions, right? Of like, he's got the EVP sitting next to it. He's got the EVP and he's got the EMF sitting next to it, the little K2 meter. And he was asking it questions, and he had the Ovilus as well, so it was giving real-time answers. So he's sitting there, he's asking it these questions, and it would occasionally answer, but it was never like a useful answer. And then I started to kind of piece it together that some of the answers that it was giving were actually in the chat from people who were watching the live stream. I'm like, some of these answers kind of correlate to that. And I've long since had this theory about demons being able to see more than ghosts would be able to, right? You know, you think of ghosts and they're kind of like limited to their immediate surroundings, and any kind of images and media that you've ever seen, any of these things, you see that like the ghost is kind of limited on what it can see. And off topic to some degree, I think that the closest any film has ever come to accurately portraying the spirit world, quote unquote, and how ghosts kind of perceive stuff around them, I would say Insidious is probably the closest that it can get. They're allowed to see certain things, and they're allowed to interact with certain things, and those things become illuminated to them. But I digress. So I think demons have the ability to see, obviously, far more than what ghosts would be able to. And I mean, you look into the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum and the Ars Goetia, the Lesser Keys of Solomon. Look into that sort of stuff, and you can see these demons some have special abilities in which they can see things that are past, present, future, great riches, untold stuff. You know, they have these abilities to see stuff that people often go to them for in order to get these answers, and that's how people become intentionally possessed, right? So so I think like they can read these chats, right? And with some of the questions that were being asked in the chat, it was answering directly once I started kind of like bouncing back and forth. And so I tested it out. I started asking it questions in the chat, just directly to the demon, or to the doll, right? Not to the guy, because some people were like, hey, ask it this or ask it that, and they were waiting for him to ask and whatever. I just started talking straight to the demon, and it would occasionally answer. So I was pretty impressed with the findings there. It's not like I used a scientific method or anything to determine this thing, but so this goes on for a little while, and eventually, like, it's a little chatterbox. It's talking or whatever. The Ovilus is going nuts. The K2 is going nuts, and then finally, I just asked it in English, "Are you a demon?" And then it just shut down. Like, it got very quiet. And then it started to light up the K2 meter, and like it was like holding in this aggression. Like, it's like, I want to talk, but I can't because this asshole knows like he's on to me or whatever. And then they can't lie either. You know, You get certain people that they can't lie to because they're either they're in good standing with Christ. And I'm not sitting here like tooting my own horn like Christ and I are best buddies or anything, but I feel like I've worked on my spiritual development enough to where I have a little bit more clout in that department than, I don't know, say just any old buddy who's asking demons questions. So it just shuts down, and the K2's going nuts. Won't talk, won't answer this dude's questions at all, won't answer anything in the chat. I shut up for a little while because I'm like, I want to see if it comes back. It does. It eventually comes back and it starts answering questions and starts talking to the dude again. And then I ask in Greek this time, and I ask, are you a demon? Again. And it shuts down again. Just same situation where the ovulus stops, goes silent, the K2 meter is just lighting up all the way to the red. And so I forget what else I asked after that, but eventually, like I said, hey, do you want, I stopped talking to the guy entirely. I'm just strictly talking to this doll. And I said, do you want me to come down there and pay a visit? And then it says yes. And then the dude answers and realizes that I'm talking to the doll, but he's like, yeah, if you want to, you come down. He's like, oh, my bad, you were talking to the doll. And then we laughed about it, and he's like, well, where are you from? Or where do you live at? And like, as he's saying, where do you live at? The ovulus goes, yeah, where? Like, it cuts him off, because at this point, I think like the demon wants to know where I live too. And I said, you know what, I'll just make it real simple. I'll come down and pay you guys a visit. And then that's the current case that I'm dealing with the guy directly to kind of pinpoint some other stuff about it and figure out a time schedule, something where I can come down there and actually engage with this thing one-on-one, which I think is going to be awesome. And but other than that, man, I've just got like some minor cases that I'm working, trying to help the people get back on the right track, because honestly, that's all it takes in a lot of cases. This is like deliverance ministry stuff. When you hear about exorcisms, a lot of people think automatically the Catholic Church, but in the Protestant faith, we typically call it the deliverance ministry, where you're just trying to help people avoid demonic influence. And sometimes it gets into the realm of requiring an exorcism, and it's pretty wild, man. Like, I didn't think I was going to be into it, or like I was going to do well at it, or that it was something that I could see myself doing long term, but I kind of see myself riding this this train till the brakes fall off, which could be any time, because sometimes these demons, man, they have a way of like really impacting your mental health. And I encourage reading this book called Hostage to the Devil, and it's got a lot of really fascinating stories about exorcists and what sort of things that they went through. But yeah,
thank you very much for being with us this morning. As always, I am your host, Mr. Edward October.
All right, I'm going to do my shill though real quick. Yeah, you can always tune in. You can find us. We host a program called You Had Me At Bigfoot. I and my friend V, we host this program. It used to just be a podcast. Now we do it live on YouTube every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We talk about anything from the paranormal to include ghosts and spirits and demons, and then cryptids, so Bigfoot, Wendigo, the Loveland Frog, Goat Man. We do government conspiracies as well. So we've been talking, there's been a lot going around right now that we've been talking about. And then we do aliens and UFOs and that sort of stuff. And this is not like a program that I would recommend listening to if you want some kind of like legitimate information or, some serious discussion. We are not those people. Like, most of our episodes revolve around talking about, the genitals of these weird different creatures, or have ghosts ever have you ever had sex with a ghost is a popular one. But yeah, we always love having more people in the chat to kind of make it fun. We do a very interactive show in which people, when they're talking in the chat, we're watching it the whole time, and we cater to the audience. We are an audience-centric show, so we'd love to have you. And Edward, thank you so much for having me on the program here. Really appreciate you taking the time to hear me out and listen to me ramble on about demons and ghosts and other spookies. Certainly appreciate it. I think that's it.
On the next Octoberpod,
now that I've talked your ear off,
Ouija 2, Planchette Boogaloo.